Thank you for coming. I want to welcome you to this, our final talk in the Architecture Lecture Series for the semester. Special thanks to Professors D'Angelo and Kaplan for keeping this running and bringing in lots of really interesting perspectives. It's with great pleasure and honor, really, that I welcome our guest tonight, artist Kate Kretz, whose work has both haunted and inspired me since I first encountered it about 2 years ago. Working with acrylic and oil paint, embroidery, textiles, silver point, sculpture, drawing, and the list goes on. Kretz's depth and breadth of technical skill and precision is paired with an equally astounding capacity to engage with some of the most painful of human experiences through an aesthetics of intimacy and care that soothes the very wounds it prods. In Kretz's work, particularly that which is in the Davis Gallery at present, and an exhibition that is opening tomorrow, so come back 6 to 8 o'clock, artists talk at 6:45. You won't be disappointed. In that work, particularly the works featured in that exhibition, Kretz engages with experiences of bodily, emotional, and interpersonal discord, if not outright violation, offered to us in the form of delicately constructed objects that often feature text. Texts the tone of which appear jarring, in contrast to the fragile materiality of the objects that hold them. Making art that is not only about, but made of the stuff of human experience, and those of women in particular, Kretz interrogates the spaces between the social and the embodied, the material and the ideological. As the stream of accusations of sexual harassment and abuse filter in our contemporary moments in the media, Kretz's work is a reminder of the very real effects, the material effects, of systemic violence, and it is a much-needed antidote to the dehumanizing spectacle that is our current media sphere. Kretz's work has appeared in over 95 international newspapers and has been featured repeatedly in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Miami Herald, the Huffington Post, the Atlanta, Art Papers, Surface Design, as well as Esquire, Vanity Fair, Italy, and Elle Japan, among others. Her work has been featured in exhibitions around the world, including the Museum of Arts and Design, the Academy of Arts and Design at Tsinghua University in Beijing, the Frost Art Museum, Fort Collins, Mocha, the Museo Medici, San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles, Hardcore Art Contemporary Space in Miami, and many more. You'll be here a while if I give you all of her credentials. Recently, in 2016, Kretz was awarded the Southeastern College Art Conference Award for Outstanding Artistic Achievement among the numerous residencies and grants that she has been given throughout her career. So please join me in welcoming Kate Kretz.
Thanks everybody for coming out today. I want to thank Hobart and William Smith College, the Art and Architecture Department, and especially Angelique Semenek. Said it right? For bringing me here. I grew up just a little bit downstate in Binghamton, and so the drive up yesterday was very nostalgic and features very heavily in my life story. I wanted to let you know that I'm going to give you about halfway through the talk. There'll be a slide for a trigger warning because there is imagery related to sexual violence, and we don't have any children, so we don't have to worry about the other stuff. Okay. My father, a high school French and Latin teacher, was a dreamer who had a really difficult life, but made a great deal of magic for us. When I was 9, on his school teacher salary, he somehow managed to take a family of 6 to live in France for a year. It inspired me to leave for Paris myself when I was 18 years old, with a promise of an au pair job, $200 in my pocket, and no return ticket. Movies helped my dad survive, and his challenging childhood was spent looking forward to Saturday afternoons when he could pay his nickel and go to the movie theater. He lived in films and somehow conveyed to each of us how to live the big life of a protagonist in a narrative where anything is possible. Long before the days of VCRs and DVDs, he would put us to bed early so we could wake up at 8 or 9 p.m. to watch some essential film on TV. The formal elements of my work, and indeed my life, Angelique has seen my house, and there's lots of color in my house too, originated from a visual regimen of Catholicism and Technicolor films. Both employ lurid colors, dramatic light, and a highly defined code of morality. Most significantly, both contain an air of repression that is almost palpable, and a tacit understanding that there are certain truths that we dare not utter. I rejected Catholicism, but held on to the rapturous visuals and became obsessed at an early age with telling difficult truths. This mission has consumed my work from the very beginning through decades of seemingly disparate subject matter and dramatic shifts in media. I blame and thank my father. Each book he handed me, every film we stayed up to watch, and all those intense dinner conversations focused exclusively on the concept of an impervious sense of personal integrity developed through rigorous inquiry. After years of exposing us to dozens of stalwart literary and cinematic characters who told the unvarnished truth despite all costs, who always did the right thing, never taking the easy way out, after endless hours of his Socratic method discussing with us every kind of ethical conundrum, we set out on our own, quixotic lambs, eager to conquer the wolf-infested forest. I suppose that I chose this vocation because after discovering that every job, including the one that pays for my art making, has its share of compromise, disappointments, corruption, or sagging standards, art making was the only one that seemed to offer the possibility of complete autonomy. So my earliest work centered around night landscapes. A lifelong insomniac, I used to climb out of my window at night and wander around, intoxicated by the night air. I then focused on nocturnal humans because people are more real at night. You're more likely to hear what is truly in someone's heart at 3 a.m. than you are at noon. The figures are surrounded by obsessively detailed environments. This is a 6 by 6 foot painting that took me 9 months to do, 3 months for the pillows. I've always been a workaholic. During the endless numbers of all-nighters that I pulled, there seemed to be a subliminal correlation between being up at 4 a.m. and the focused intensity of painting each stitch of a tapestry. Like a spider who works through the night, intently weaving an intricate web, stepping back to see what she has done when the sun comes up. At this point in time, I was interested in making paintings that were as visually seductive as possible, but if you looked closer, there were elements that destroyed the illusion. The chaos of a tilted picture plane, cheap paneling, a dress missing a belt, chewed off fingernail polish. Having grown up in a poor family, I was now thinking about class and attempts to transcend it. I was thinking about shame. I was thinking about those parts of our life we try to control that do not always cooperate. So anyone who has ever taken a painting class knows that there are 2 cardinal rules: loosen up and know when to stop. I knew from the instant that I heard both of these rules that they were not meant for me. As time went on, I got tighter than I could ever possibly explain to you. And now I still burn through size 20-0 brushes by the dozen. Not only do I not know when to stop, I have a deep, dark secret. My paintings take 6 to 24 months to execute. And by the time the work is finished, most paintings have 10 to 12 pages in my sketchbook devoted to lists like this. These are the hundreds of tiny things that need to happen before the work is finished. I'm not kidding. I don't let the paintings go until there is not one more thing that I could do to make it stronger. Anything less would be a compromise, and I couldn't live with the work or myself. If you're not a painter, let me assure you, this is not the way that most painters work. Despite the endless sketchbook lists, risk-taking is a monumental part of what I do. Not many people know that after making things, my second greatest passion is collecting in-air experiences. I flew small planes myself, went up in the blimp, rode in helicopters and gliders, and enjoyed skydiving in my earlier years. I have now reached the point in my work where I'm only drawn to making things if I have no idea whether I will be able to pull it off or not. I am addicted to the exhilarating free fall of art making. To my mind, there is little reason to even make a series of work unless each new piece pushes technique, medium, concept, and/or subject matter. I find the concept of branding somewhat odious. This puts me at a disadvantage in my career. Artists are multi-dimensional beings. Surely there is no reason to repeat yourself once you have learned all you have to learn from making something and said what you needed to say. If I was working to satisfy the requirements of anyone or anything else, I might as well be making widgets. Every artist who is not a trust fund baby solves this problem in a different way, but I decided a long time ago that I would teach to make money. I learned early on that every time I've tried to make art for money, it became a torturous, excruciating process. I was constitutionally incapable of doing it. At this point in my life, I've accepted my fate. I figure somebody in the world has to make this kind of work, and it might as well be me. When deciding what to do next in the studio, I often ask myself if this was the last piece I made before I died, what would it be? Through a serendipitous process that guides me through my research path, the universe responds and tells me what to make, really. As Martin Buber wrote in his 1923 book, I and Thou, this is the eternal origin of art, that a human being confronts a form that wants to become a work through him, not a figment of his soul, but something that appears to the soul and demands the soul's creative power. What is required is a deed that a man does with his whole being. If he commits it, then the creative power is released and the work comes into being. And, he adds, the work is imperious. If I do not serve it properly, it breaks, or it breaks me. The form that confronts me, I cannot experience nor describe. I can only actualize it. And yet I see it, radiant in the splendor of the confrontation, far more clearly than all clarity of the experienced world. I have several lifetimes worth of ideas, and the paintings take so long to make that I have to choose where I'm going to invest my time. So in my practice, there's always been an uncanny aspect to figuring out what needs to be made next. The ideas, like spaghetti, are thrown against the wall, and the universe helps me determine which one sticks. The development process always needs to begin with compelling visual imagery, include a challenge to do something I have not done before, whether technically or conceptually, and then, most importantly, the layers of meaning in a potential piece start to serendipitously reveal themselves to me and build upon each other, and then I know that this is the work that needs to be made next. For example, the Beautyrest Series featured women sleeping in cars in various states of consciousness. The idea began with a visual impetus, the way that light and shadows move across a figure in a car. But I had also been plagued for years by nightmares in which I was driving a car and a man was trying to block my view with his coat or throw himself between me and the windshield. I got out of that relationship. I thought about cars as metaphors for relationships. They can take you to exciting places, but can also be claustrophobic. The concept for the series was banging around in my head along with a few others. And then I began to meet woman after woman who literally gave away the keys to her own car, didn't pump her own gas, or was in some way or another a passenger in her own life. I wasn't looking for it, but these stories dropped at my feet. The thoughts and experiences came together like a train wreck, telling me that I had to make the paintings. I titled work in this series after real articles in Cosmopolitan magazine, a publication devoted to teaching women how to appear independent so that they might snag themselves a husband. So they would have titles like this, How to Tell If He Is Lying to You, page 42. At this point, a gallery offered to show the Beautyrest series if I would continue to paint women sleeping in cars, but I was already on to the next thing. Individual series, made after a series of profound personal losses, I focused on the bereft feeling one gets following the realization that the rest of the world is not playing by the same Catholic Technicolor rules. I also moved on to straightforward self-portraits. I didn't want to hide behind a constructed narrative any longer, and was interested in practicing what I called radical vulnerability as defiant act. This piece, Promise, is a crying self-portrait executed in charcoal. The parts of the face that swell up when one cries are emphasized through color, and a vigil candle is caught in the clavicle area, suspended in the short gasps of breath experienced during a hard cry. The candle was a theme running through the series, and many of these works also featured an open mouth. I believe that showing one's hidden self to others was the most effective way to connect to other human beings and make them feel as though they were not alone. But I was convinced I could dig deeper. Around this time, my parents lost the beautiful house that I grew up in to the bank. And Fate of a Technicolor Romantic is an exaggerated view of my parents' subsequent home. This 6 by 8 foot painting took a solid year of intense work to paint. It began as another self-portrait, heavy with familial shame and crammed with some of the books and the films that created my idealistic beliefs, the ones that were now so much in conflict with the outside world. But the painting evolved, as long paintings do, into a war of light between reality, represented by a dim 40-watt light bulb, and the blue light of idealism glowing from the Technicolor film on TV. In all of my paintings, light carries content, and it's as vital and as concrete in my mind as any other element in the work. I took pilot lessons at one point, and because this painting is also about dysfunctional family, the pilot's manual is open to emergency approach and landings because one constantly has to be prepared for the next crisis. On the TV is the gazebo scene from The Sound of Music. Old Milwaukee above it was my dad's spear of choice. My mom hates this painting and tells anyone who will listen that her house is not dirty and it doesn't have paneling. She doesn't get the notion of psychological squalor. I got a grant and went from one artist residency to another during the summer, working on this painting at each stop. I was at the Malay colony here in upstate New York, talking to another older artist and telling him how emotionally draining this painting was to work on. Start something else, he said. Do what your hands want to do. So I whittled. Some penises I have known embodies the feeling of vulnerability that comes upon the realization that you have made not one, but a host of bad choices. It borrows the style of American folk art, one of my loves, and depicts the idiosyncratic characteristics of each suitor. Some have called this a man-bashing piece, but that wasn't the way I looked at it. Radical vulnerability, remember? The common denominator to these bad choices was me. It was the first time that I realized that work could be an exorcism of sorts. Once they were embodied in an art object, the weight of these bad decisions left my consciousness. Sacred Ovaries depicts the conundrum of desiring a child, but knowing that you will, despite all your best intentions and lots of therapy, pass on some of the familial pathologies. I mapped the Sacred Heart, a Catholic symbol of devotional love, onto the ovaries and filled the kitchen with symbols that embody those dangerous human frailties. When this piece was shown at Agnes Scott College, it landed me on the annual Catholic anti-defamation list. When I tried to have a conversation with William Donahue, the president, I've spoken with him several times, after he sent me a nasty letter, I told him that I thought it was an incredibly reverent painting, and his disgusted response was, "That's what you artists always said." The open mouth that was featured in the earlier self-portraits became disembodied at a certain point, appearing in the sanctum suite of small encaustic paintings. Encaustic is pigment mixed with beeswax. Here, the interior landscape is painted in wax and pigment on one layer, while the bas-relief mouth and teeth are on a cutout second level above. I see now that this was another attempt to go deeper and get beyond two-dimensional limits. My work often uses weather as a metaphor for the unpredictability and devastation of dealing with loved ones who are troubled. Although I am a thrill seeker who is fascinated by tornadoes and would be the first in line for a tornado watch vacation, I'm also plagued by nightmares where several tornadoes are hovering on the horizon, a symbol of impending doom, catastrophes waiting to strike. I am trying to capture the anxiety of waiting for a force of nature to descend upon you. The work is the result of a lifetime of familiar moments when the phone rings, another intense family drama is revealed, and I brace myself, thinking, here we go again. Later, this open mouth appeared in a series of pillows embroidered with my own hair. I think of these embroideries as drawings. Note that the mark making on this first one is still quite crude, and it gets more intricate with each piece. Whenever I think I cannot possibly get more obsessive in my work, I find a way to go further. My young lover uses the hair of an ex-boyfriend. I invented a tool to thread each hair individually through the pillowcase so it appears to grow out of the case, cascade around the embroidered ear, and across the pillow. Years ago, a boyfriend brought me his hair in a box, saying, "I think you love my hair more than me." He's not around anymore, but I kept the gorgeous hair on display in a glass box in my living room for several years. I figured when I got engaged that I should make a piece from it and get it out of the house. Bad juju. Ebb used human eyelashes that protrude from the surface of the pillow. The pillows were shown at the Museum of Arts and Design in New York as part of the Pricked Extreme Embroidery show a few years back. I then moved to found fabric and doilies, stretched under convex glass and Victorian frames to emphasize the relic-like nature of the pieces. By this time, I'm using various shades of hair and semi-weaving the threads to create the effects that I want. Each hair embroidery takes about 3 months to do at the rate of about 3 hairs per hour. I literally feel like each one takes a year off of my life, and I have very few of these tight embroideries left in me. I think I'm doing the very last one right now. It's an act of resistance to make this kind of work in a world that moves as fast as ours does. Time is our most precious commodity. A large chunk of my life, the large chunk of my life that is invested, and the meditation while making it, is part of the gift given to the viewer. 15 years ago, I never would have dreamed that sewing and embroidery would become a part of my work. I had no training in fiber, zero. At a certain point though, working solely with the illusional space of two-dimensional work became inadequate. It was too distanced and I wanted to go deeper, to get inside. So I thought about creating psychological states that one could wear. We normally use garments to construct an identity, a conscious choice of our own packaging presented to the world. I began to create clothes that reveal psychological states rather than concealing them, leaving us beyond naked and turning the insides out. Up to this point, my sewing experience was limited to pillows for my couch. Long before upcycling became a thing, I decorated my home with objects that I had made or altered from thrift stores. I created this object for my living room, and curators there to look at paintings started pulling objects like this one off the shelves, convincing me to show them alongside the paintings. And up above you see it in an earlier stage, and then I decided it needed padding, so the bottom shows it in its final stage. The embroidery of veins on a padded satin surface was repeated again in my first garment, Fertilization Dress. It is a found dress with 2 layers of navy chiffon. I embellished both layers with sperm made of fake pearls and embroidered tails. They stop at the biologically correct spot, but one stray sperm suggests that it is the heart that will be fertilized. Fertilization purse in blue velvet with padded red satin interior was made to match. I took a thrift store purse apart, making careful notes of how it was stitched together, used it as a pattern, and made my own new one from scratch, using the old frame. The entire piece is stitched by hand, as I would have no idea how to do it on a machine. While deep into this series, I was asked to participate in the Vagina Show at iDrum Gallery in Atlanta, and I seized upon the opportunity to create the Vagina Dentata purse. A functional clutch with a snap mechanism in hand-dyed velvet and shaped shells for teeth. I learned how to use a grinder for that. Often, when I speak at universities, a timorous young man will raise his hand and ask, where did you get the idea for this piece? Not knowing that it's an ancient archetype. Defense mechanism coat is made with 150 pounds of roofing nails pushed through the surface of a blue wool coat. Inside the coat, all the major veins and arteries of the body are embroidered. I wanted to make the interior look so tender that it would bleed if touched. So I quilted the flesh-colored silk velvet. This behemoth occupied my dining room table for 3 months, and I cried with joy when I realized that it was going to work and not fall apart when hung. I think that if I actually knew what I was doing when I made this coat, that I never would have even attempted it. This piece must be carried around on a special carrier, like a dead body, and to hang it without injury requires 4 strong people following a precise ritual. Bleed is made from a pair of Victorian leather gloves, dyed, shaped, and shrunk. Like many of my pieces, I realized my subconscious influences long after making the piece. The gesture in these gloves reminds me of Grunewald's crucified Christ. That happens all the time. Okay, this is the physical memory last goodbye dress. I was embracing someone for the last time and realized that I was trying to burn the actual sensation in my brain, into my brain as a physical memory that I could relive at will. Made of washed silk, it records all the points of contact of 2 people engaged in a final embrace. Individuation is a psychological term defining a natural, healthy separation from one's family of origin as one matures and becomes an independent adult. Individuation dress is constructed of fragile cotton voile, machine embroidered from top to bottom with the text, "I am not them, across the surface. The sash is lace embroidered with the words love, guilt, encircling the waist of the dress several times before trailing onto the floor. Despite the attempt to create a new and pure sense of self, the family of origin inevitably seeps up and stains the surface, disintegrating the individuation mantra. I sewed this dress myself, but I hired someone else to put the zipper in because I knew I couldn't do it to my own satisfaction. And here are the dresses installed at the Frost Museum, with the coat, which I don't own any longer. I can't resist the urge to make clothing speak. I was finally, my mother would say, married 10 years ago in my early 40s and spent about 2 months of studio time making my wedding dress, flower girl dresses, and ring pillow. My husband really wanted to get married in a church, so I conceded. In addition to referencing my status as a not quite budding first-time bride, the falling trailing rose petals from my virtually invisible 20-foot train were my defiant response to a church that decreed no real rose petals were allowed to be thrown in the ceremony. I depicted the ultimate taboo with regards to vulnerability in a series of crying men, all executed in different media. I was interested in the idea of painting the swollen, translucent flesh after a hard cry. I find it incredibly poetic that during our most vulnerable moments, our insides are visible through our outsides. This painting is oil and acrylic. Crying Man 2 is embroidered on red velvet in bas-relief. And Crying Man 3 is painted in encaustic wax medium. In 2005, I left a tenured teaching position for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work in the studio full-time. And after 20 years of showing in nonprofits and university galleries, I finally signed up to work with my first commercial gallery. Around the same time, I had an inexplicable, overwhelming urge to do an assumption painting. You know, kitschy clouds, Pootie, the earth below. I started gathering reference information, then promptly put it away, thinking you've never done anything so over the top, literally religious and kitschy. You can't make this work. This cycle happened 2 or 3 times. I feel like I really needed to make this painting, and then would start the research, and then I would chide myself and cast the idea aside as ridiculous. But then one day I was in line at the supermarket and I looked up. Every single magazine cover featured a picture of Angelina Jolie with her children. So my assumption painting, now entitled Blessed Art Thou, became a painting about the cycle of celebrity worship, particularly as it relates to consumerism and self-esteem. Next to all the magazine images of our perfect present-day heroes are the pages selling diet pills so we can quell our feelings of inadequacy. For me, it was a challenge to try and convey the light and mood of the Walmart, the oppressive environment that drives someone to pick up the magazine. Everyone focuses on this part of the painting, but the painting is really about these people. Blessed Art Thou was shown at the Miami Art Fair in December of 2006. But before the fair even opened, it had appeared on every news network and in every major newspaper in the world. It was an exciting, then a terrifying time. Up until then, I led a relatively sheltered life and considered pop culture to be a type of ridiculous noise. I hadn't followed any TV shows for 25 years. I never read tabloids. But the world that surrounded me for a few months following this painting's unveiling was made up of all the things that I had deliberately distanced myself from my entire life. I was exposed to a lot of celebrity websites where commenters call each other names and write ugly things about people that they've never met. They hadn't come up with the term trolling yet. I received death threats from the good Christians, and we had an alarm installed inside of our house. Disparate groups of parasitic people latched on to the painting to use it for their own strange agendas, riding the coattails of this trending thing that I had made before finding their next host. I learned about the news cycle and the connection between marketing and media. Mostly I learned that the average American does not understand the concept of metaphor. I now file this work away as a type of performance piece, temporarily foisting me into the very system that I was trying to critique. People had many suggestions about hiring a publicist or capitalizing on the opportunity. I actually did have a second related piece sketched up and ready to go, but I ultimately put it away because it was a world that I did not want to be a part of. Perhaps the most difficult thing to deal with was the accusation by people who had never met me that after 25 years of making difficult, largely unsaleable work and avoiding commercial galleries, that I had done this piece, quote, for the publicity, unquote. This painting was the first time that my work looked outward rather than inward, and I did not summon courage to try that again for 7 or 8 years. But after Blessed Art Thou, my new gallery guaranteed me a great big spot at the entrance of the following year's Art Miami Fair. Usually pieces are chosen for fairs after they're completed. So what does one do with this type of opportunity? To my mind, the only thing I could possibly do was create a painting about the vulgarity of art fairs. I spent the next 9 months creating Requiem for Vasily and the Ineffable. The painting was made at the height of the art market boom, when many newly rich collectors were buying art not because they loved it, but for status and investment to turn a profit. The atmosphere of an art fair is like that of a shopping mall or a sports stadium, where the magic and impact of art is lost and it becomes just another commodity. The triangular canvas references Vasily Kandinsky's theory of the pyramid, where he posited the artist as visionary at the very top of the triangle, leading the rest of civilization behind him. I inverted the triangle to represent the market's disempowerment of the artist, who is shown alone at the bottom in the studio, creating a work that may have tremendous power, but becomes just another object in a sea of objects at the VIP party for the wealthy that is the art fair. Although I have a lot of interest in fashion, I have no interest in status symbols myself, but I did great research and took great pains to make the designer fashions, handbags, and cell phones in this painting up to the minute in style, in hopes that some people would stand in front of the work and see themselves reflected directly in the painting. At the height of the art market frenzy, in response to millionaire artists who don't make their own work, Damien Hirst, Jeff Koons, etc., I decided to celebrate the workers' garments that I wear when I create my large, consuming paintings all by myself. And here I am in one of those pair of overalls with Requiem for Vasily. I invested even more time into these relics by embroidering them with observations about the art world to create the Art World's Truth series. This series, like many others, is ongoing, with 7 currently completed. And this is a real, I lived in Miami for 10 years, and this is a real quote from a 19-year-old artist on a panel. And then there's one, I wear overalls in the winter, but I wear dresses in the summer. So this is the only one that is a dress. It's a little hard to read. The top reads, and still audiences never seem to tire of the bad boy artist story. If only I had the ability to pee off of a balcony. And this is most people's favorite, actually. I collect vintage guardian angel prints, and they were the impetus for guardian angels that don't come through. Here I made a series of paintings. This one is gouache with embroidery. And I also did some that were custom etched mirrors on drawings suspended over graphite-coated tissue paper. Even as I was making these semi-ironic pieces, I did a very sincere guardian angel mural on my daughter's bedroom wall. Yes, I finally did have a daughter. She's the love of my life, and speaking as a woman with a 19-page CV, giving birth was the only thing I have ever accomplished that my mother is truly proud of. It is noteworthy that I had spent my entire life up to this point making work about human vulnerability and strong emotion, self-satisfied with my bravery and ability to handle discomfort. I thought I was way out there, on a trapeze without a net, holding nothing back. But as it turns out, I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. All of that was nothing compared to having a child. I suddenly had the sensation of having lived in a pitch-black room for all of my life and opening the door to a light so bright that I felt certain it would kill me. My capacity for every possible emotion was stretched wide open the day my daughter was born. A few years back, I gave a paper at the National Textile Symposium in DC, suggesting that not only should artist mothers not be written off, as the art world has traditionally done, but I made the argument that by every single definition of qualities that a great artist must possess, artist mothers, by virtue of very real physical and psychological changes, have the capacity to grow tenfold as artists and make the most powerful work of their lives. I'm not just saying that. While art historians have always studied and noted the influence of travel, friends, wars, and milieu on the work of male artists, the most profound and life-altering experience any human being can have has been ignored in these discussions of creative inspiration because it is an exclusively female phenomenon. Heart Center employs three-dimensional embroidery along with taffeta dressmaker details on the mat. I worked on this piece early in my pregnancy at age 45, when everything was tenuous and I was confined to bed. I can remember thinking of the baby as I worked, consciously making each stitch as a way of sewing her in and keeping her. The piece is a reference to the saying that once you have a child, your heart is forever walking around outside of your body. Upon the occasion of my daughter's birth, I became almost agoraphobic, irrationally figuring that if we never left the house, nothing bad could ever happen to her. Stay, made with her first pair of shoes and her baby blankets, addressed some of these complex feelings. Your Fragility was also made within her first 6 months of life. It is a simultaneous invocation for her safety and a confession of my own newly hyperbolized emotional vulnerability. The hair used in the embroidery was that which was on my head during the time that I dreamt of her, during the time that I carried her. Like rings of a tree, a length of hair embodies the passage of time, carrying a discernible record of an organism's extreme life experiences. A similar piece, The Beauty of Your Breathing, was made while sitting next to my father in hospice a few years back, when attention to breathing took on a whole new meaning. It is now a part of my daughter's collection. The repetitive act of embroidery seems to be made for calming worry, trying to tie things down, sew them in, and make them stay. Embroidering with hair possesses its own unique intensity. Each barely perceptible stitch is like a rosary bead, marking a tiny but ardent prayer whispered over and over. Decades of Dreaming of You features embroidery on more of this hair that I sported during the months of gestation. You lose a lot of hair after you have a child. You get it back. The egg is made from one of my unraveled pillowcases from that time period. I've held several panels on motherhood and art making, and I remember hearing an artist say, whatever you do, don't use nest imagery. So of course I had to. The next pieces utilize this new technique that I developed of embroidering on a surface of hair, but these works celebrate the wild woman archetype, critique society's obsession with childlike hairless bodies, and attempts to render older women invisible, and our refusal to go gently into that good night. After devoting 25 years of my life to making art exclusive of everything else, adapting to caring for a child was difficult, to say the least. Artist Louise Bourgeois once said, "A woman has no peace as an artist until she proves over and over again that she will not be eliminated." Knowing that women artists are traditionally written off after becoming mothers, I was determined that I would not disappear, but it was a tough road. 2 weeks after I became pregnant during the crash of 2008, my husband, a scientist, was laid off from work and was unemployed for most of my pregnancy. It was the beginning of a difficult period that we're still recovering from. I packed up the contents of the awesome studio my husband custom built for me when we were married a few years before, not having any idea when it would be unpacked. 2 days after I gave birth, we put a huge house full of furniture in storage, and we drove to Rockville, Maryland from North Carolina with me perched on a pillow, a newborn, a cat, an 80-pound dog, and whatever else you could fit into our trailer. I found myself in a new city with no support system, and we lived like grad students in a temporary apartment for a year. My studio was a folding table in the corner of our bedroom apartment with 2 boxes of carefully selected art materials and 1 box of art books. I had 3 part-time jobs, a baby, and was terminally exhausted. But I stayed up late, I got up early, and I embroidered small works with what I had at hand. Around this time, I had a request to send my life-size study for Blessed Art Thou to a show in Berlin. It was never intended to be exhibited, and I could not let it go as is, so I worked on it, pinned to the wall of the living room between the dog bed, the kid toys, and the card table we had set up for eating. I covered it with tissue paper when I was not working, so neither beast nor human would dribble or spill food on it. With my scaffold packed away in storage, I stood on a folding chair to reach the high parts while my daughter watched me from below. One of my fondest memories, actually. I was unusually productive with more shows than ever before in my life, but there were days when I did not get to make anything, which contributed to a deepening depression. I was not used to having days without concrete progress on a project. Indeed, I came to realize that my self-worth was depending upon it. I felt like an imposter and a traitor, and I created art marks to get me through that first year, and I made 63 tiny works. I unpacked part of my studio after 2 years, but still had no room to paint, so I kept producing small drawings, embroideries, and gouaches. Around this time, I was invited to make a drawing for a Silver Point exhibition, and I began working on a standard gessoed panel. After After 5 minutes, I became bored out of my mind and thought, I can't do this. A simple, straightforward silver point drawing of a tornado. I know exactly how it's going to turn out. It will drive me nuts. So I went to the thrift store. I got a stack of silver spoons and ladles to draw on, figured out how to make it work, and that was the beginning of the Tempest and Deluge series. The silverware pieces then led me to this piece, Une femme d'un certain âge, or a woman of a certain age, an embroidery of a vintage silver dagger executed with the crowd-sourced gray hair of dozens of women. To my delight, I found that the hair, when cross-hatched, glimmers like real metal. I feel this work gains tremendous potency from the collective life experiences of all these women. Although the hair was mailed to me, I like to envision all of them in a room, telling their common stories of endurance and resistance through this embroidery. One of my grateful hair donors wrote me a lovely poem about the dreaded invaders she had always purged from her head, and the sorceress, me, who showed her that the threads were actually made of precious, magical silver. The collector who owns this work told me that when he stands in front of it, he feels rage emanating from the piece. I never saw that, but he does. The final word uses hundreds of French knots in a pointillist fashion. There is a cut at the top of the black cotton velvet that has been crudely mended. I am beginning to identify a pattern in my newer projects. I read some story of cruelty or wild injustice, and it feels like a literal blow to my body. I carry the pain and sometimes the horrific image around with me until I can transform it into something beautiful with the creation of an object. The tremendous amount of time spent working on the pieces is cathectic, which means imbuing an object with meaning by devoting lots of time to it. A type of meditative healing practice akin to prayers, incantations, or sutras. It discharges my pain while infusing the object with transformative energy. I have discussed these feelings of super empathy with other artists, and many have told me that they feel the same way. One friend described it as feeling too porous. The remedy for being too sensitive is exorcism through art. If it doesn't heal the world, at least it will heal me. When I thought this piece was completely finished, I looked a little harder, and I ended up spending another 9 hours on the half-inch area of the face to get it just right. In 2015, thanks to a grant from the state of Maryland, I am once again in a studio that allows me to paint after a 6-year hiatus, and a dramatic and unforeseen shift has occurred. All the while that I was feeling a little bit thwarted and making all these small pieces, I was researching and gestating a new, radically different series. The research period began in 2011, the actual execution began in 2015, and they are both still ongoing. My reading has been so extensive that I'm keeping a running bibliography. I have actually shifted my opinions on 1 or 2 long-held beliefs from this research, and the psychological intensity of the subjects I was investigating almost destroyed me. When I told my therapist I was going to see an exhibit about dogfighting at the Crime Museum in DC, she actually forbade it and insisted I take a break. She said, "You can't live like this, you can't maintain this. It's like you're living without skin." And I thought, wow, yes, that's it, I am. But staying home from the museum is not going to change that. The impetus for this new work came from all the problems in the world that keep me awake at night. For years now, ubiquitous news of war, extinction of species, climate change, the growing imbalance of wealth, violence against women, and abuse of law enforcement power seems to be permeating and overwhelming the consciousness of everyone I know. I felt certain that there was a common denominator to all of these crimes against children, women, minorities, the poor, animals, and the earth. 6 years of research into these seemingly disparate transgressions has resulted in a deep investigation of entitlement and the need to dominate others. While my past work makes many references to vulnerability, and recent pieces take steps towards a kind of defiance, virtually all of the in-progress work in my studio right now is aggressively confrontational, a kind of calling out of the various ways that human beings subjugate animals, the planet, and other humans. I am particularly interested in the perpetrators whose tactics often go unnoticed because they are accepted and seen normal in a patriarchal capitalist society. My working title for the series is Bully Culture. Becoming a mother and thinking about the world my daughter will grow up in has only intensified my desire to understand and give voice to some of the challenges she is going to have to navigate as she moves through her life. What I'm showing you today is the beginning. The overall body of work will be expansive. And the work is beginning to feel hauntingly prescient since the US election of 2016, which I am sorry to say did not surprise me at all. It was necessary to begin this series by examining the way in which I am complicit in subjugating other beings. Therefore, the first wave of this work, the Cognitive Dissonance series, addressed the assumption that we have the right to treat sentient animals as inert commodities. In psychology, cognitive dissonance is the mental stress experienced by an individual holding two contradictory beliefs or values at the same time, such as loving animals in one context, but also eating them after they live horrific lives and deaths just to fill our dinner plates. Love Object for a Future Trophy Hunter is about the liminal state between children's instinctual identification with and need to protect animals, and later feeling entitled to eat, wear, and even hunt them for the thrill. On a larger scale, this piece embodies my confusion about the transition that humans make in many areas of our lives on the path from empathy to ultimate objectification. The Gunlicker series is about the fetishization, I always have trouble with that word, particularly the fetishization of guns, particularly the ones that are not tools for hunting dinner or protecting your family from an intruder, but machines designed to kill as many people as possible in the shortest period of time. Scientific research has proven that the chemical secreted when firing a gun is the same one that we secrete when kissing someone. These images were inspired by open carry advocates who fetishize and wield deadly weapons of intimidation as fashion accessories. The first Gunlicker painting was featured in a Huffington Post article that, surprise, made me and my young daughter the target of gun activist harassment and threats. Curiously, a good friend, one who has been supporting my work for decades, accused me of asking for it by making the paintings, causing me to ponder whether anyone ever told the male artists who created the atrocities of war or Guernica that they were asking for it. Traditionally, the casting of minorities, the poor, and even animals as other has always been the first step in rationalizing violence against them. So my paintings invert this paradigm, employing abject cues, details such as nose hair, dirty fingernails, drool, etc., not just as tools of satire, but as an attempt to turn the tables and present aggressors as foreign, strange, and other. Storm, a painting and embroidery on black cotton velvet, depicts a vision of contemporary life. The video footage of a guy coming in the doorway with the semi-automatic, the moment before the tragedy happened. The ominous clouds hovering over an upside-down house references the impending threat and how many lives are about to change forever. The embroidery below conveys agitation and electricity in the air with the way it is stitched. This is a breeding stand designed for use on female dogs. Also referred to as a rape stand, it is an apparatus that dog fighters use to, and this comes from the website where you can buy the rape stand, to hold unreceptive or inexperienced bitches still for breeding purposes, unquote. Rape stand for a dog fighter depicts Michael Vick, sports hero and convicted dog fighter, alongside a proportional diagram for my fantasy of a custom-made Vic-sized breeding stand. Trophy, trophy, trophy draws distinct connections between assorted acquisitions. There will be more work like this one that questions similarities of intent behind various activities that sometimes fall below the radar. And here they come. Very Important Penis, a work about sexual entitlement, was inspired by the lengthy list of powerful men in sports, politics, and now film and the art world who have been convicted of rape or sexual assault. An evolving online component that has not yet been adjusted for the most recent barrage of perpetrators tags the piece with the names of these prominent men so the image comes up when you Google them. I was invited to an exhibition celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Ready Made, and that was the impetus for Ready Made Brass with Lock, an appropriated, mass-produced object designed to hang from the trailer hitch of large pickup trucks. It was made to be viewed from a distance, so the scale is unusual when hanging on the wall. And the paranoid implications of the lock are hilarious. Sometimes I'm a bit dismayed to find so many penises in my work. It was certainly not what I set out to do, but it is appropriate in this time when male sexual entitlement is finally being looked at, pun intended, in our society. I find it interesting that when we do talk about feminist depictions of nude men, they always seem to be labeled erotic, even when it seems very plain to me that much of it is decidedly unerotic. If we must finally listen to women's voices, how convenient and fun it is to assume that they want to talk about sex instead of power. Testosterone was a piece that I did not consider successful until I made a pink glitter frame for it, and then I really liked it. Good Evil Monster Battle is a completely unaltered 7-year-old girl's drawing that I appropriated, simply embroidering the battling penises on a pair of men's pants. As the series progresses, I've become increasingly interested in mixing up the language and imagery to point out overlaps in various aggressive behaviors. How is the mounting of a hunting trophy different than serial killer human trophies collected to relive the thrill of the kill? What is the distinction between the sense of entitlement required to ravage the living earth and its inhabitants for your own profit versus raping a person? Why do we hate playground bullies, but accept aggressive corporate lawyers asserting their legal briefs to do essentially the same thing? Are there people for whom the intimidation factor of toting a powerful weapon at an anti-gun rally produces the same frisson, pregnant with latent potential, as being alone in an empty garage at night, close to an unknown young woman? Studies have shown that perpetrators often discriminate and oppress across boundaries essentially attacking anyone who's not like them. People of all genders, classes, races, and religions need to join forces to call out those who use force and violence to exert their will upon the world. Bell Hooks reminds us, dominator culture has tried to keep us all afraid, to make us choose safety instead of risk, sameness instead of diversity. Moving through that fear, finding out what connects us, of reveling in our differences, this is the process that brings us closer, that gives us a world of shared values, of meaningful community. I've done extensive research and gestated the concepts and formal aspects of this work for so long that I am certain some of my imagery is completely unprecedented. That's a hard thing to say. Several people have told me you can't do that, which tells me that I'm really onto something. I believe that one of the major inspirations for this body of work comes from the recent strides that we have made in our understanding of rape culture over the past few years. Traditionally, the depiction of rape has been illustrated throughout the centuries by male artists as an heroic, even romantic pursuit, viewed from a distance, similar to battle scenes and other great conquests. Because male artists did not identify with the victims, they rarely depicted scenarios that even approached the actual horror of rape. And most of the women look a bit dismayed rather than horrified. So, after all the centuries of women being presented as little more than a prop in male artists' fantasies of self-actualization, it is no surprise that when female artists of the 1900s were finally granted the opportunity to share their point of view, virtually all chose to create imagery that focused primarily on the victim's devastated post-assault body. Present-day female artists, for the most part, seem focused on revealing what it feels like to inhabit a woman's body and psyche in the isolated, withdrawn, numbing aftermath of rape. In the course of my research, I discovered websites such as rapefilms.net and rapebait.net, where men can post and view short film clips of rape scenes cut from their original context of mainstream, porn, and foreign or obscure films. To my mind, when there are vast audiences using rape imagery for self-gratifying purposes, depicting a rape victim in a work of art becomes problematic, to say the least. I was determined to avoid that phenomenon in my own work. The imagery I do employ is a deliberate physical manifestation of a profound revolutionary shift happening in our culture. It is shocking to think that it has taken us thousands of years to untangle the systemic misogyny that throughout history has repeatedly blamed women for inciting rapists' supposedly uncontrollable desire. But unbelievably, finally, we are pointing our finger at the rapist rather than the victim. The point of view in my work reflects that monumental shift. It redirects the gaze, creating an intersectional battle cry to point at perpetrators and bullies, not just in circumstances of rape, but in many disparate areas where their actions have long been accepted as the status quo. Much of the work calls out the aggressor, employing what Bell Hooks calls the oppositional gaze. In Hooks' Black Looks, Race and Representation, she describes, quote, being punished as a child for staring, for those hard, intense, direct looks that children would give grown-ups, looks that were seen as confrontational, as gestures of resistance and challenges to authority. She recalls being, quote, amazed the first time I read in history classes that white slave owners punished enslaved black people for looking. The slaves were denied their right to gaze. She comes to the conclusion that, quote, all attempts to repress black people's right to gaze had produced in us an overwhelming desire to look, a rebellious gaze, an oppositional gaze. By courageously looking, we defiantly declared, not only will I stare, I want my look to change reality. I am employing this oppositional gaze in my own work to continually keep our eyes upon perpetrators everywhere, not the distractions they create, the excuses they make, or the spectacles of violence against victims they create for our consumption. One for the Team is a multi-panel piece that alludes to the confluences between sports culture and rape culture. We encourage and prize the aggression of our sports heroes, but many fans seem surprised to learn that they often possess companion traits of being barbaric to women and/or animals. The story of the small-town football hero rapist protected by a community that turns on the victim has become a tired cliche. The images here are burned by hand onto slices of wood, a traditional male craft, to reference decorative objects normally found in a rural bar, restaurant, man cave, or living room. I'm not trying to create a specific rape scene, but rather a portrait of rape culture, depicting indoctrination, ubiquitous photography, adding new additional humiliation through social media, participants of both genders, teen loyalty, proving manhood, a fascination with the spectacle of brutality that goes back to gladiator days, and of course, a calling out of the perpetrator. I'm capturing the fleeting details that a victim might absorb, not only during an actual assault, but subsequent images surrounding a perpetrator who is still accepted, defended, and even praised by his community after committing a heinous act. My refusal to show the victim allows for openness regarding their gender, reminding us that it is not only females who get raped, and that the act itself is one of dominance, violence, and degradation that is encouraged by our culture in a myriad of ways. This piece is in progress, and this is the first of 3 panels in a triptych entitled Huddle. Each panel will depict closed circles of men in vastly different contexts. What I've shown you today is only the beginning. I've never had a clearer vision or a stronger conviction for a body of work. And given the state of the world, spending time on anything else seems frivolous. I feel I have no choice but to create art that rages against a patriarchal, misogynistic, capitalist philosophy. One that has always existed, but seems to be hitting a crescendo. I'm not just speaking of the sudden rise of a monstrous dictator, but of a deep-seated groundswell of hate and peer-sanctioned violence that is swelling from the electronic empowerment of bullies who now have voices to egg each other on and an unprecedented ability to organize. It's a mentality that will eventually destroy our species, if not our planet. I believe that many in this world are devolving and using a simplified version of evolution to defend it. How many times have you heard someone use the phrase survival of the fittest as a rationale for bad behavior? Alpha has become a desirable status to attain by both men and women, with a completely convoluted notion of what it actually means. In reality, if you go back to Darwin's Origin of Species, you would see that Darwin only mentioned survival of the fittest a few times, while he mentioned love and cooperation hundreds of times. It was Huxley, often called Darwin's bulldog, who reframed it to fit his own agenda and sold us the notion of aggression as a defensible human trait, pointing to animals as an example. The trouble is that almost daily there is new animal research coming out, pointing to cooperation, different forms of democracy, and one might even argue compassion, not just within many animal species, but across species. The earliest human tribes took care of their sick, their children, and their elderly, until one deviant decided to start storing extra meat in a hole in the mountain for himself instead of sharing. It's been a downhill battle since there. There are countries in the world where evolved people understand that everything is connected and we must take care of the least fortunate and our host, the earth, for society to be healthy. America just doesn't seem to be one of them. Bullying permeates our culture and our institutions. Our country threatens any who would oppose U.S. interests. Our children grow up indoctrinated into capitalism with fewer and fewer restraints on corporations who control workers and consumers while destroying the planet we need to sustain us. Parents across the country pay lip service to fighting playground bullies while simultaneously tuned in to the uber-aggressive Housewives of reality show or the football game, where huge swaths of players are forgiven rapes and violence against animals or their own wives and children, as long as they win. We teach our kids to dominate, intimidate, annihilate on the soccer field, preparing them for lives in the corporate sphere. In parts of this dystopia, open carry advocates don weapons in public, excited by the power of wielding the latent potential to mow down dozens of people in under a minute. Unsurprisingly, 12 months ago, this country elected the ultimate bully as leader of the free world. We are at a moment in history when the apotheosis of power-mongering, misogyny, and male entitlement embodied by our president has the potential to set us back hundreds of years. I would not normally be interested in making work that is so nailed down to a specific person and time, but this last summer, I couldn't help myself. To keep sane, I was compelled to draw our Commander-in-Chief's mouth, swollen with self-importance and hyper-articulated in 12 different ways. A moving orifice spouting directly from the id. One of the libel drawings was featured in Hyperallergic's Drawing in a Time of Fear and Lie series. They invite artists to write short essays to accompany their drawings, prompting me to do another work, which just appeared last weekend, along with the essay, Sociopaths Don't Cry. So this in-progress painting was begun 3 years ago and was initially inspired by the 2011 Strauss-Kahn Sofitel hotel case in New York, where a powerful World Bank figure was accused of raping a housekeeper. While the impetus for its creation was sexual entitlement, the appetites of oligarchs evolved into a piece with layers that also addressed the military-industrial complex, corporate and political power. The figure is standing on the world's most expensive Persian carpet ever sold at auction, with the night bombing of Baghdad in the background. The piece was conceived and begun long before Trump announced his presidency, but the hands bear an uncanny resemblance, as do other unsavory attributes. This large, life-size painting will hang at the top, with the top of the canvas away from the wall to loom threateningly over the viewer. Generally, when discussing women painting nude men, there is a sexual element, turning the tables on the male gaze. While unconventional, a fun, sexy, saleable product is created. A woman painting a male nude in an unflattering light is far less common. And a male curator in my studio recently asked me, how does it feel to make a painting that will probably never sell? I responded that I don't make any of my paintings to sell, but if I had it on hand, I would have responded with this quote by Adrienne Rich in her 1997 op-ed on why she refused the National Medal for the Arts. She stated, like government, art needs the participation of the many in order to not become the property of a powerful and narrowly self-interested minority. Art is our human birthright, our most powerful means of access to our own and another's experience and imaginative life. In continually rediscovering and recovering the humanity of human beings, art is crucial to this democratic vision. artists are one of the final holdouts. One of the last influences upon our culture that is not owned and run by a board of directors. Our news, our politicians, the sources of our daily images, even our education system are all controlled by types of corporations. The pleasant humans we encounter as we move through the day at Starbucks have almost all been given corporate lawyer-designed scripts to follow in order to collect their paychecks. So it makes me a bit sick to my stomach when freshman art students talk about branding. Because if our art tribe gives up, that's it. You know, there's no one left. It's just us and the poets. There have to be voices in our society that have no agenda beyond telling the truth. If we, as artists, throw away our power, being seduced into adopting a corporate mentality so we can just make our shit and get our piece of the pie, then there's really no hope. James Baldwin said, "The role of the artist, then, precisely, is to eliminate that darkness, blaze roads through the vast forest, so that we will not, in all of our doing, lose sight of its purpose, which is, after all, to make the world a more human dwelling place. We all have a part to play. Mine is to shine a bright light on those who seek to oppress, to remind all of us that we need to continue looking back at bullies, calling them out, keeping them in check, and reminding the rest of us that we are all in this together against bully culture." Thank you.
I know we're a bit over time, but
Sorry.
Are there any questions for?
Because some of your work is definitely very confrontational, have you found that in some of the gallery spaces or in applying to show your work, have you found that you've had some censorship through that?
Censorship is a very complicated issue. There are lots of spaces that might have kids passing through, that have events, they hold events in their rooms, you know, the art is on the wall. There are certainly people who have come into my studio, and this happened twice, I've told this story, who come into my studio and say, wow, this has to be seen. And then they think about how they're going to show it to their board of directors or whoever, and they walk it back, you know. So it does happen. I understand it. You know, I don't really, it's not really my intention to cause grief for these people. I'm always very, you know, upfront about, hey, this is what's going to happen. And I also say, you know, I may not be the only one on the line if somebody decides that they're going to get angry about this, you know. And so it can be dangerous for the curator as well. Yes?
Early on, you sort of talked about the idea of a sort of personal, like, economy of time and effort and focus on sort of specific ideas. And I was wondering what things motivate you to sort of follow specific threads and sort of go with specific ideas and work on specific pieces.
I'm actually writing a book about it. I've been teaching a class for about 20 years on finding your visual voice. And I think that we all sort of, you know, have some ideas, you know, gestating in our head. And one of the things that I'm teaching is how to sort of open yourself up and see all of the serendipitous things that you ultimately will find if you're looking for them, that tell you that this is what needs to be made. And oftentimes, sometimes it's something really magical, like, you know, you just run into somebody and they tell you this stranger and they tell you a story or whatever. But other times, it's just things that are happening in the media. So, you know, I might have 4 ideas that I'm thinking about, and then, you know, something happens and I'm like, okay, this one's a go right now. And so I'm always moving things kind of from the front burners to the back burners. as a result. And you see that last big oligarch painting, I've been working on that for 3 years because I just keep kind of going to other things. And I think part of that is that I think something else needs to happen to it, and so I'm holding back. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm wondering how you started using your own hair, because it sort of feels like a medium you don't just like stumble
Right.
on.
Well, most people are really grossed out by it. I'm not pulling dirty hair out of my dream. When I wash my hair, when it's still wet, I just grab a handful and stick it in the bag. It's nice and clean. Recently, I've started getting it from other people. I think I just started thinking about different art materials as part of my practice and making, that's why I work in so many media. I'm always thinking about what is going to be the most potent medium for this piece. And I started to think about how our life history is recorded on our hair. And so what could possibly be more potent than that? That said, it's a really insane medium to work with and a very frustrating medium to work with. And I've seen a couple of people do it online and they kind of make some tricks to do it differently. But it's not the same kind of work that I'm doing where I'm going one thread at a time and weaving and all that stuff. So I think potency was the reason that I chose hair. And it just, kind of grew from there. The first ones were just, I'm going to embroider with my hair because this is my history and blah, blah, blah. But then I started, when I had my daughter and I, had all that hair on my head, I thought, wow, this hair has like her pregnancy recorded on it. My pregnancy, her gestation recorded on it. And I thought, wow, that's an incredibly powerful thing. And I'm really sad that somebody bought the nest like immediately. Because when I made it, to be honest, I didn't even think it was art. I just made it. I just made it and said, like, wow, I don't know about this, but okay, we put it in the show and somebody scarfed it up and now I wish I had it back. And yes.
You say your artwork are not for sale, but if you must sell your artwork to the galleries, to the museums?
I do sell artwork. I haven't worked, and it's kind of a long reason, so I'm not going to go into it, but I was trying to get tenure in the university. The paintings take a long time, and so I figured rather than having them tied up with a gallery, I would start just showing them myself. So I built my whole resume by driving my work in trucks to various universities all across the country. And so at that time, it was a choice for tenure. Then I decided to work with a commercial gallery, and 3 of the galleries that I've worked with have closed, as a lot of galleries have in the recent past. And so it's not that I don't want to work with them, it's that there have been, various circumstances where I have, and they've sold some work, but I sell a lot of work just by myself, by showing it and people coming up to me. So I do sell the work. What I'm saying is I don't make it to sell, which is very, very different. I never, when I'm in the studio, I never, ever think, oh, somebody's going to want to buy this. Because if I did, I would start making it differently, thinking about the person who is going to buy it instead of what needs to be made.
How do you position yourself when you're making the artwork? Like what are you saying? You're trying to respond to the issues?
Yes, yes. I really feel, I keep saying what needs to be made, I really feel like I have little to no say in what I make. And I'll let you guys know, if you have not watched the TED Talk by Elizabeth Gilbert on creativity, you need to do it. It's amazing. It's one of the most watched TED Talks. And she talks about this. She talks about how your job is to be there in the studio, and your inspiration comes from without and passes through you. It's very interesting to talk to. Did I answer your question? Okay. Anybody else?